Hello and welcome back to another Facebook Live. I'm Chris Martin, the digital content creator for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And today we have a very exciting presentation for you today. We have Jupiter, the Great Horned Owl, and Renee Schell, Lander Region Information and Education Specialist. And they're joining us live from Lander. So if you have any questions as we go throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in the comments and we will address them throughout the presentation. So without any further ado, Renee, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I am here today with Jupiter, the Great Horned Owl, and I want to talk to you all about animal adaptations. And adaptations are things that all wild animals have that help them survive. And it's either a behavior that they have, so something that they do, or it's a trait that they have, something that they have. So we're going to talk about adaptations today, and Jupiter is a wonderful tool to walk through his adaptations and kind of see how they transfer over to the animal world. I usually get a lot of questions about Jupiter himself, so I'll start there, and feel free during this whole thing, if you have questions, please type them in the chat so we can have some kind of back and forth communication as well. And I'll answer questions as we go. So Jupiter is a great horned owl. That's the most common owl that we have in Wyoming. And he has an injury. So that's the only reason why we have him at Game and Fish. We have a special permit that allows us to have him, to care for him, and he has to go out for educational visits every year. So he travels and sees school children, nursing homes, adults with disabilities, all kinds of programs that he travels to see. A lot of injured birds have wing injuries, and he does not. So he's fully flighted, but he has an eye injury. So his retina's detached or partially detached. So if you were to hold those big milkshake straws, fill one of those up and hold it right in front of each of your eyes, that's where he can't see either. So right straight in front of his eyes. That was enough of a disability for him to not be able to hunt. So he was found in Jackson in a field, and he was found starving. Birds have this bone in their chest called a keel, and raptors, which are birds of prey, so that would be like owls and hawks and vultures and eagles, they have a bone called a keel where they store their fat. So the Game and Fish biologist that picked him up was able to feel that there was no fat there, and he was taken to Ironside Bird Rescue in Cody, where they figured out his eye injury. So after he was healed up from that, he came here to the Lander office, where he's lived for 18 years. We have had him for 18 years, which is hard to believe. He was an adult when we got him, and so we don't know how old he actually is. The oldest wild great horned owl was 19, but the oldest great horn in captivity was 50. So we're hoping that he lives till 50. So if you have any questions about Jupiter during this, just put it in the chat and I'll answer those. But let's move on to adaptations, animal adaptations. So Jupiter, one behavioral adaptation, I should say, as he looks around here, he just hooted. I hope you guys all got to hear that. I don't know if he'll do it again. Sometimes he does it twice. I have no control over that. He just, every once in a while, will do that during the presentation. So that is a huge honor. That's super cool. I will say, what I was going to say is that he will sometimes look around, since he was a wild animal, he's still getting used to doing presentations, sitting on my fist. So sometimes he looks around for somewhere to fly. He may fly off my fist, which is called baiting, during the presentation. And if he does, we'll get him right back up on my fist and we'll continue where we left off. Thanks, Jupiter, for the hoot. That was pretty cool. So let's start with their behavioral adaptation. So an adaptation that some animals have is their nocturnal behavior. Most of you probably know nocturnal means active at night. And so owls, skunks, foxes, some mountain lions, some other predators especially are active at night, as well as rodents like mice, and voles are more active during the evening. So how this helps owls and other animals is that they are active when, so for Jupiter, he's active when the prey is active, when those mice are active, when the skunks are active. Even some rabbits are active during the nighttime. The other thing that it does is it separates out competition. So if you think of it, if the great horn, lives in the same habitat, shares the same space with maybe a red-tailed hawk, they're going to be active at different times of the day, and so competing for food during different times of the day. So that's one adaptation that he has. I have a question. So it says, the Oland boys want to know, what does he eat every day? That's a great question. So Jupiter, I'll tell you what he eats, and then we'll talk some about what owls eat in general. Jupiter every day eats big game hearts. So we have hunters during the hunting season. If they don't want to keep their hearts, lots of people like to eat them, but if they don't, they bring them to our office and donate them to Jupiter. And hearts are full of vitamins and healthy fats and are actually a very lean muscle as well. So that's what he loves. And he gets a vitamin and mineral powder that I dust on every day to just complete that nutrition for him. He does rest 1 day a week, and that's good for his digestive system, and that happens in the wild too. Owls don't necessarily eat every single day. Other owls, though, we have owls in Wyoming and in North America of all different sizes. So the biggest owl is a great gray owl, and the smallest in Wyoming would be like our northern pygmy owl. The northern pygmy is about 7 inches, and the great gray is like 24 to 33 inches. So owls of different sizes eat different things, right? That makes sense. A big owl is going to eat bigger things, and a small owl is going to eat smaller things. So small owls eat a lot of mice, some insects, but more those small rodents. And then larger owls, especially the great horned. So he's not the largest, but he is the strongest. And he can take your cat, so keep your cats inside, skunks, snakes, other birds. So owls eat a lot of other birds, especially even other hawks. Rabbits. He loves rabbits. So lots of great horns love rabbits. Let me see. I've got some more questions. How often do they cough up pellets? So let's talk about what pellets are. So pellets, when owls eat, they cannot digest the fur, the bones, the exoskeleton of an insect. Those are things they can't digest. What they can digest are the fats and the proteins, which are the meat. So all the fats and the proteins go down, and they actually prefer the fats. If you ever find an animal and just the brain has been eaten, just the head, that's probably some kind of raptor. That's what they go for first. So the fur and the feathers get compacted into a pellet and the bones, and they get coughed back up. If you have cats, kind of like a cat coughs up a hairball. And they do this about twice a day. So every 12 to 20 hours, it's usually twice a day. It's usually once on their hunting roost at night and once on their resting roost during the day. And I actually have a pellet here that I'll hold up to the camera. You can see this is a pellet. When they cough it up, it's wet at first. This one's already dry. You can see fragments of bones. This is actually a skull right there of a rodent. And these are pellets that were found in the wild. Sometimes Jupiter will cough up a pellet. Sometimes he will have a squirrel. He looks like he might fly, so get ready. Oh, come on, bud. There we go. So sometimes Jupiter will get a squirrel that we give him, or something that has the fur and the parts, and then he'll cough up pellets as well. How many toes does Jupiter have? So let's talk about owl feet. So this works right into diet. So an adaptation that owls have so that they can catch their animals and hold on to them and eat them would be their talons and their toes, and then their beak. So their toes, I'll see if I can get Jupiter a little closer. Might be hard to count all of his toes. Right now he's got 2 in front, and these are very long, sharp talons. And if you can see, not very easily maybe, he's got 2 more toes in back right now. Owls have then 2 in front, 2 in back, 4 toes on each foot. However, they've got some tricky feet, and this is a neat adaptation that they have. They have a toe that can flip around from the front to the back. So sometimes they have 3 toes in front and 1 toe in back. So this would be the preferred way to when they want to catch an animal and grab onto it. This is more secure. This is going to give them a better grab on an animal. When they're perched like this, for more stability, the 2 toes in the back and the 2 in the front gives them a little more stability. And it would be the equivalent of like if you could take your pinky toe and flip it around to your heel and then flip it back to your toes. I can't do that. I don't know anybody that can, but owls can. And that's different than hawks. Hawks, that's something that hawks cannot do. So and even in the raptor world, there are a lot of different adaptations. Owls sleep during the day, as you guys know, and I have a question. How many hours a day do they sleep? I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that. They sleep a lot of the day, and they probably sleep partly in the night too. I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up and get back to you. Owls do teach their young to hunt. So someone says, can you tell us how they teach their young to hunt? Yeah, I sure can. So male and female owls both have a part in raising their young. And right now, between February and April every year are when owls are nesting. And so owls, another adaptation they have that saves them energy is that they don't build nests. They instead use other birds' nests, and they use them during a time usually when those birds aren't using them. So if a magpie built a stick nest in a tree to raise their young in the summer or the early spring, the owl might use that nest February through March or April, depending on the species. So that saves them some time and energy. That's a handy adaptation. The female usually will sit and incubate the eggs. So that's happening right now. For great horned owls, most of those owlets have probably hatched right now because they usually hatch for us in Wyoming around the end of March. They're tiny white little puffballs. Their eggs, great horned owl eggs, look like this. This is a replica of a great horned owl egg, a lot like a chicken egg, about the same size as a chicken egg, but more rounded on the end without that conical end. And at first, the male does all the hunting, usually. The female sits, the male does most of the hunting to start. He brings back the pieces that the female pulls apart and feeds the young. And then as the owlets start to get a little older, the female will hunt too, because as you can imagine, their demand for food increases. The owls need 1/5 of their body weight every day. So for a 100-pound person, that's 20 pounds of food every day. That would be for us. That's like a small car tire. That's a ton of food. So owls are busy all day hunting for their young or night, and themselves. So when it's time for the young to start to learn to hunt, they're going to fly right along with the parents. It's just like you learn from your parents, right? You watch what they do, you imitate what they do often, and you learn. So that's how they teach them to hunt. I'm reading some more questions. That's why I keep looking over here. How long did it take him to get used to people? That's a great question. So Jupiter is still getting used to people. I was not here 18 years ago. I've only been here 14 years. So I wasn't here when he first got here. When I did get here 4 years ago, he did all right with people, but he's come a long way. He's gotten a lot more comfortable. Jupiter has signs, just like all raptors do, where he'll show me when he's stressed. He'll kind of pant like your dog might at home. And some of that might be because he's hot, but then will get very rapid if he gets stressed. Often he does that with loud noises. So if I'm in a classroom and they're loud and he's showing me some signs of stress, I'll ask them to calm down, and he will quiet right down. So he's learning. How big are the babies when they're born? So owlet babies, so remember we talked about owls come in all different sizes. In Wyoming, our smallest owl is about 6.5 to 7 inches. So that owl is going to be very tiny when it's born, right? When it comes out, it's going to be about this big. And then a great horned, it's got to fit inside this egg. It's about the same size as a chick. Like if you've seen chicks at, if you've ever raised chicks or seen them around at farm stores this time of year, they're about that size when they come out. Their eyes are closed and they're all white. Owls are born with all white feathers. And then in a week or two, the feathers come in a little bit more gray. And then when they get their adult feathers in is when they start to have the plumage that you see, the colors. And those colors are another adaptation. Just like most all wild animals are camouflaged. And sometimes it's not obvious, the camouflage of wild animals. So Jupiter, if you can imagine, if you think about where most owls spend their time, most of them spend their time in trees. We do have some ground owls, like the burrowing owl, and some other owls, like the snowy owl and the short-eared owl that have their nests on the ground. But most other owls are in the trees. And so if you imagine a pine tree, the bark of a pine tree looks very similar to Jupiter's feathers. He's got some reddish, some brown, some white. A lot of people always ask, the white doesn't seem like camouflage. Where is there white in the tree? And so where that comes in, and this is true also of fawns when they're born and they have the white spots, that's actually camouflage. So in a tree, when all the leaves are out in the spring or even when they're not, and the light comes down through the trees, if you look on the ground, it makes a dappled pattern of light. So fawns, many mother deer, will curl their fawns up and leave them for the whole day under the roots of a tree. And so that's a camouflage for them. They're blending in with the roots that are brown and the dappled light of the tree. So just like Jupiter has the white on his feathers that imitates that light coming through the trees. And every owl, just like we have different hair color, every owl, every great horned owl looks a little bit different. So there are some, you might see a picture of a great horned owl that doesn't have as much red as Jupiter, or maybe has more, or maybe doesn't have the white right here, or maybe has more white right here. So they can vary by individual too, which I think is really neat. So I'm reading a question. Do great horned owls reuse nest locations? Yeah, that's a great question. So they do reuse them. So if you have owls that maybe near your house, and great horned owls are very common in almost all habitat types below 9,000 feet. So, and this is true of other owls too, as far as reusing nests. They will pair up year after year. So they raise their young together throughout the summer. Then in the late fall, the male and female might separate. And then in about November, December, the male arrives first back to that territory where they raised their young the year before, back to his territory that he established. And he begins calling. So if that time of year you hear more owls calling in November and December, that's what's going on. The males are establishing their territory. The male owls have a lower, deeper voice that travels farther. And then the females come, and they usually pair up. As long as they both come, they pair up year after year, and they will often use the same nest or maybe one nearby, but they often have the same territory year after year. That's a great question. Someone asked, where do we keep Jupiter? He is kept in a mews. A mews is a word for an enclosure that a raptor is kept in. And so his is like a double shed size, if you can imagine. Inside, he has some windows that are screened and have bars on them. So he get whatever temperature it is outside is the temperature that he's living in. He has big perches in there. I can't believe he did it twice. This is so cool. Maybe he likes this room we're in. He's not usually ever in here. Thanks, bud. He's got big perches on either side and has enough room to fly between, since he is fully flighted. And then there's a platform where I leave his meat every day, and he's got some fresh water in there that has a heater and a stump and some kind of a few other things in there that he can fly between. So that's where he lives, here at the Lander Regional Office. Yeah, so we kind of answered, there was one question, do great horns stay with their mates for life? Kind of. So usually for life means they won't pair up with another bird if their mate dies, and great horns will. So if their mate doesn't return, they will look for another mate, but they will continue to pair up with the same mate if they return every year. That usually happens. Is there a call for great horns? Hopefully you just heard that. I hope so. I know Chris also has a link if you didn't get to hear Jupiter's hooting that he can share with you on YouTube to hear what a great horned owl sounds like. So many great questions. I do want to tell you a little bit about his eyes because it's an amazing adaptation that leads into so many other physiological, which means physical, changes in his body. So his eyes, as you can imagine, for a nocturnal animal, are so important. He's got to be able to see pretty well. Now his ears, we'll talk about his ears in a minute. They're important. They're really important too for hunting, but his eyes for seeing. So our eyes take up 5%, only 5% of our whole headspace. Owls' eyes take up 70% of their headspace. So that would be like if this grapefruit were one of my eyes. That's a big deal. I'm glad I don't have grapefruit eyes. Each eye, for me, if I were the size of an owl and this grapefruit were my eye, it would weigh 5 pounds, each eye. Now my brain, most people's brain only weighs 3 pounds. So I can't imagine the equivalent of me carrying around an extra 10 pounds. That's kind of what he does every day. And you can see in this skull that I'm going to hold up, he looks like he might want to fly off again. We'll see. This skull, you can see how big those eye sockets are. Hey, bud. Right here. There we go. So those eye sockets are huge in there. The bigger his eyes are, the more light they can absorb, right? You see his beautiful yellow eyes, and owls in North America either have brown or yellow eyes. There are some owls in Europe, like the fish owl, that has orange eyes, but our North American owls only have yellow and brown. And that's the iris, the colored part of his eye. Then the dark part of his eye is the pupil, and it opens just like ours to let more light in and closes down to let less light in. Now I get this question a lot, or I've always wondered too until I looked this up. Mammals and some birds have eye shine. So you may have seen driving around, or if you're ever out at night with a flashlight, you might see a critter and their eyes shine back at you. But if you shine the light in your parents' eyes, you shouldn't do this, or your friends' eyes, don't do it, but their eyes don't reflect back at you. So a lot of animals, with the exception of primates, have an extra layer called the, let me see if I can say it, tapetum lucidum. Tapetum lucidum. It's an extra layer of reflective cells that reflect the light back into their eyes so they can gather more light. So when you're driving down the highway, you might see those reflectors on the side or in the road, and that's kind of the same thing. So that helps them gather that light at night as well. Because his eyes need to be so big and specialized, there's no room for muscles to move them. So if you can keep your head still and look, I bet you can see, if you have a family member on either side of you, you can probably see them. You can see the ceiling, you can see the floor. He can't do that. He cannot move his eyes like we can. They're locked in place because he doesn't have any room for muscles. So he has to be able to turn his head around. Now, a question I get a lot is, can he turn his head all the way around? He can't go all the way around. He can go 3/4. So he can go from the front over to the side, or from the front over to the side. So that's a special adaptation that he does, and he can do because he has 14 vertebrae in his neck. So if you feel the back of your neck, we have 7 vertebrae. He's got 14. And he has them because he needs to turn his head around, right? To see all the way around because he can't move his eyes. So all these adaptations that Jupiter has owls have, that a lot of animals have, build on one another. He's got to have the extra vertebrae because he has these big eyes that he doesn't have room for muscles for. Let's talk about his ears. So you can't really see his ears. You can probably see this black line right here. And a lot of people think that these tufts are his ears, and it's confusing because they're called ear tufts, but they're not his ears. They're above his ears. His ears, if I were to pull the feathers away, which I won't because he wouldn't like it, right behind this line, you'd see an ear opening, and it would look kind of like this. So this is the side view of an owl. You can see their eye that's towards me, and someone pulled the feathers apart. That's the ear opening, and it looks very similar to what ours might look like without this piece of our ear, right? So his ears are super important for hunting, and they're different than ours. Ours are usually fairly symmetrical, meaning they're in the same place on the sides of our head. Owl ears are asymmetrical, so the right ear is longer and higher, and the left ear is a little smaller and lower down. So they're asymmetrical, which is a little wonky, but it helps owls because it's hard to see at night, even with those big eyes, even with those reflective cells. He needs to really be able to use his hearing. And so what happens is sound waves bounce off of objects back to him. He collects those sound waves. We have these sound wave collectors, right? These stick out, mine stick out, and collect sound waves. He doesn't have anything like this, but what he has is a facial disc. So a flattened face, and you can really see it on like a barn owl has that like a plate on their face. Catches those sound waves, and then those sound waves ride on those soft feathers all the way back to the ears. So this is like a big ear for him too, his face. So he will move his head around, and sometimes you see owls doing weird things like turning their heads upside down or bopping their heads. They'll move it around until the sound is coming into both ears at the same time. And then he can really pinpoint just by sound where something is. Now, what's always been curious to me is that even with that hearing, Jupiter, when his eyes were injured, still couldn't hunt well enough. So that lets me know that he must need his eyes for that last little bit to catch that animal. Now you can see him, well, he was doing a little bit of that panting. I think it's because he's hot. It's warm in here. So usually he's outside. It was 6 degrees last night here in Lander, and he's fully feathered. But he's okay. He's just like our dog. He's releasing, sweating, basically, by panting. So he's all right. So Jupiter, someone's asking, how did Jupiter get his name? When he arrived, he didn't have a name. Our bird biologist put out a contest to the elementary school students and said, we have a great horned owl for education. Help us name him. And they had to write a short essay. I think they maybe had to draw a picture and submit their name. And so Jupiter was the name that won. And I've seen the art the student did. They drew the planet, and they had a reason to tie those names together. Someone else is asking, do owls molt? And what molt means is lose their feathers. Yes, absolutely, they molt. And every year, I'm trying to remember the time, I see it, I believe it's every fall that Jupiter molts. And he will, just like kind of your chickens do if you have chickens or other birds that you've been around, they don't drop all their feathers at once. That wouldn't be a good adaptation, right? They wouldn't be able to fly. So they lose a little bit at a time, and they're constantly regrowing their feathers. So yes, he does molt. And someone else is asking, is it true owls can't smell, hence they eat skunks? I don't know if owls can't smell. We certainly don't talk a lot about their smell as being an important sense, but he does have nares in the top of his beak, which you can't see very well because they're covered with his feathers. So I'll have to look that one up. I've got a couple now. I have to look up and we'll get back to you. Lots of adaptations for Jupiter. I did want to say one thing that great horns have, I talked a little bit about, they're not the largest owl, but they are the strongest. I don't know if anybody has ever tried to see what their grip strength is. I've been working on mine. my right shoulder was injured, so it made my grip strength less. I finally got my right one up to like 60 psi. That might be embarrassing. I have no idea if how good or bad that is. I think it's okay for women. Well, Jupiter's, that's pounds per square inch. So that's how much pressure I can exert per square inch, how many pounds of pressure. Jupiter, with his talons, is between 200 and 500 pounds per square inch. So he is 4 to 8 times stronger on his grip than I am with mine. And to compare that, he compares to eagles. So eagles are about 400 to 600 pounds per square inch. So great horns are very strong. I've got another question. Oh, an answer. Tia is helping me with this. She put up an answer about the smell. And it says, great horned owls are one of only a few species of animals that regularly eat skunks. Since owls only have enough sense of smell to enable them to taste food, they don't have a clue as to how awful the skunk smells. They only know how good they taste. There you go. So, kind of what I thought. I would have been unbelievable that he couldn't smell at all. Very good, but I've never eaten skunk. Maybe if anybody has, they can tell us in the chat what they taste like. Yeah, so he has a super strong grip strength, and his talons, we were talking about them a little bit. I often joke with kids, I'm like, he doesn't have a fork and a knife he can pull out from under his wing, right? So his feet, his talons are like that fork to hold on, and his, he loves this. This is crazy. He must, I don't know, he loves this. This is so neat. 3 times, never had him do this 3 times. This is so cool. I'm glad you guys are getting to hear this. His feet are like forks, and his beak is like the knife that pulls the meat apart that he eats. And certainly if he were to catch a mouse, he'd just swallow that whole thing right down. Oh, something we haven't talked about yet are owls' silent flight. That's an adaptation for them. So being hunters, being a predator, it's an advantage. It's an adaptation that helps them if they can fly quietly, right, and sneak up on their prey. So their feathers are super soft, softer than a hawk's, softer than an eagle's. And those two don't have silent flight. And his feathers are soft so that when they glide over one another, it's hard to hear. And then as they go through the air, it's hard to hear. So owls have, I'll hold up this great horned owl wing. I don't know how easy it'll be to see, but on the leading edge of this wing, so this would be like this wing, on the leading edge are almost like little eyelashes. Now they're feathers, it's a fringe, and it breaks up the air as the owl flies through. So it reduces the turbulence and breaks up the air. I also have a red-tailed hawk wing, and I'll show you that it does not have that same fringe. Let's see. There we go. Yep, so just some adaptations there that owls have that help them be a little bit sneakier. Oh, he might fly again. It says, is that the closest Jupiter will get to you? Wondering how close they're comfortable with being near people. Hey, bud, right here. Yeah, he does pretty well. He's gotten used to being this close to me, and he seems okay with it. And oftentimes, too, he's had other folks want to get a picture next to him, and he does pretty well with it, too. Of course, he probably would prefer if I could hold him way out here the whole time, but I can't. He only weighs 2.5 pounds, but it's still hard for me to hold way out here for very long. Do owls have any predators? That's another question I see up there. Yes, they most certainly do. Somewhat depending on owl size. And then you also have to think of the owlets when I talk about this too. So snakes would be natural predators, foxes, especially to those ground nesting birds that we talked about. Then other owls and eagles and some hawks. Then also, unfortunately, humans. So a lot of owls are hit by cars. We think that he was hit by a car and sustained a head injury, which caused the retinal detachment. But a lot of owls get a wing injury getting hit by cars. And then, this isn't necessarily a predator, but only 50% of owlets survive trying to figure out how to hunt and be on their own. So it's a rough life being an owl. And that's true of a lot of wildlife. It's not easy being a wild animal. And so all the adaptations they have are helpful to them. There's a question that says, which raptor species tends to compete territorially with great horns? Usually it's the red-tailed hawk, because they're fairly common. They like similar territory. They like similar prey items. So that, and then sometimes some other owls, but yeah, that tends to be the biggest competitor for these guys. Great horns will nest either in a tree cavity or in an open nest that they find, and we talked a little bit about that. I didn't tell you guys yet that we have 19 owl species in North America, and you can find 15 of those in Wyoming. Now, some are rare occurrences, but 15 of those 19 have been sighted in Wyoming. We have more like 12 that are more regular, either residents year-round or that winter here. So if you can imagine any animal wanting to winter in Wyoming, it would be the snowy owl. So they're coming from Canada and Alaska, right, where they summer up there, and to them, this is a mild winter. And then we have burrowing owls that come in the summer as well. So we've got some migratory animals and then some that stay year-round. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to shoot them out there. Why do they have ear tufts? What's the purpose? I love this question, and I love talking to people. Whenever I talk about adaptations, I tell folks that plants and animals don't have extra energy for things that they don't need. So everything that they have and almost everything that they do is for a reason. Even if we don't understand that reason, it's there for a reason. So the ear tufts are one of those. We think we know what they're for. We have some guesses, but we may not have the right answer. So some guesses are, we talked about great horns spending a lot of time in trees. And in a tree, if he didn't have those ear tufts, his head would be very rounded. And lots of owls are that way. They don't have ear tufts. But we think this helps great horns. Number one, they can put the ear tufts up to look larger, but it also breaks up that rounded head pattern. So those ear tufts might look like a little twig off of a branch. They might look like a leaf. So part of that camouflage, and then also part of that intimidation factor. Which reminds me, talking about size, we've not talked about raptor size. And in all raptors, so all birds of prey, the males are smaller than the females. And that's another adaptation that we have guesses on as scientists, but we may not have the right answers. Some of those guesses are that the females need to be bigger to sit on the eggs and defend them. Another guess is that the females need to carry the eggs, to have room to carry the eggs. So there's some guesses about that, but females are about a whole head size bigger in raptors than the males. And you can often see this. If you see a pair of bald eagles or a pair of owls sitting in a tree, one is usually noticeably bigger, and that would be the female, which is fun to know if you're observing from the ground. Another question, was it difficult for him to get used to being handled? Yes. Yeah, I think it was. I wasn't here right when he was learning everything, but I'm still working with him every day, every month. I work with him. And certainly if I picked him up every single day, he'd get more used to it. But he does an educational program once or twice a month throughout the year. So he gets a lot of rest in between there, and gets to kind of just be an owl. Move his foot there. So he is still used to being handled. He might try to fly again. Does he bite or attack when feeling stressed or threatened? No. He is actually, oh, come on, bud. He is actually very gentle. So we talked about how strong his grip strength is, and he is so gentle with me. He could be really digging in, and sometimes I can even, move him around without a gloved hand. He's very gentle. And I feel like he knows his strength, and he chooses to be gentle with humans, which is really nice. Does he like being pet? I try not to pet him. I try really not to treat him like my dog or my cat, like a pet, because he's really not. He was a wild animal. And even at Game and Fish, we have to have a special permit even to be able to have him. And this is true too for feathers. A lot of people have feathers that they might find, and you are actually not allowed to have the feathers. You've got to have a special permit to have them. So anyway, I try not to pet him and try to just give him that respect, because I would imagine he might not like it very much. Can Jupiter be reintroduced into the wild? Unfortunately, he cannot. So with his retinal detachment in his eyes, he just can't see well enough to hunt. Since he was found starving, he can't hunt for food well enough to be able to be reintroduced. Can people pet him when they're at Game and Fish? No, we don't do that. Sometimes we will get him out on a set schedule so people can see him, or if I'm around and I'm in the office and I've got some time, and especially if you call ahead, that's a lot easier for me. And once we get past coronavirus and we're all out again, I'd love for people to call up and be able to come and see him, but we don't touch him. Does Game and Fish promote or support falconry? Yes, yeah, actually we do. We are the ones that give the falconry exam. So if folks are interested in falconry, and maybe Chris can look that up or we can put it on this post later, that link to where our falconry information is, and there's all kinds of information, and we do support that. We have a lot of falconers that we're close with here, and sometimes falconers are also our bird rehabilitators. That works out nicely. You have to mentor under a master falconer to get started, and they will teach you so many things, and then there's certain birds that you can start with, but that mentorship goes a long way towards learning everything that you need to. We've got a lot of reading material, and then again, once you're ready, you can always call any regional office or the headquarters to schedule a time to take your falconry test. And falconry is a really neat, there are different hunting seasons and often some extended seasons on small game and birds. It's a really neat sport. If you're not familiar with it, it's neat to look into. Jupiter isn't trained like those birds are. So those birds are kept at a lower weight so that when they fly away, they come back for food. If I let Jupiter go, we don't have that kind of understanding. He gets fed every day, he eats as much as he wants, and he would just say, see you later, and then he might not survive so well out there. He can fly. Someone asked, how fast can he fly? He can fly a great horn can fly about 40 miles an hour. Jupiter might not be able to because he's probably not in as great a shape as he used to be when he were in the wild. How long do owls live? So with all raptors, typically, the smaller the raptor, like a kestrel is a small raptor, or a small owl like the elf owl, they live a shorter amount of time than like an eagle. So a small raptor can live 15 years and an eagle can live maybe 60 years. That's a huge span. We know that the oldest great horn in the wild was 19, and the oldest great horn in captivity was 50. Usually, on average, in the wild, great horns live till about 13 years. So that's an average, but that does take into account the owlets that die when they're very young. And then on average in captivity would be more like 35 to 40 years, but I'm hoping for 50 years for Jupiter. That'd be great. Yes, and there's another question. Where does the owl live when he isn't with you? He lives here at the Game and Fish office, and he's got a nice enclosure where he can fly and is exposed to the elements. I mean, he's got a roof, but he can feel the snow, and he can feel the wind, and he can feel the heat in the summer, but he can also get away from those things too. And we have a question, what do you feed him? He eats those big game hearts we talked about right at the beginning, and we have hunters that donate those, and they fill his freezer, you guys. We always have enough, which is wonderful, that folks donate them. We joke here that this is probably about the only place that you could come to work and there would be a frozen heart in a baggie on the doorstep, and it's okay because you know it's what it's for. You know it's for Jupiter. We joke about that here. Well, we've been about 45 minutes, guys. If there's any other questions, I'll take them, but if not, I'll try to answer those that I didn't get to as they keep coming in. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you guys learned a bunch, and maybe I'll get to see some of you with Jupiter once this is all over.